Moving over to the advisory, my next guest says the government's proposed super changes will hit everyone hard eventually. Alex Jamieson from AJ Financial Planning joining me now. Alex, good to see you. Thanks for joining us on AusBiz. I mean, we are in the midst of an election campaign, but tell us your concerns if the government does get re-elected and these changes come into effect.
Yeah, it's the unrealised gains principle. So essentially, the $3 million sort of legislation that's been put forward with super. If we sort of turned our mind over to New Zealand, they do tax on unrealised gains, and that could be a testing point where they could extrapolate it out to other areas for people's investments.
So what happens as well if we see a major correction? Everybody's sort of trying to avoid looking at their super balances at the moment, but can you sort of see some of these losses offset against future gains potentially, or what should people be thinking about?
Yeah, I think when we sort of think about the legislation piece, they do talk about a high watermark. So there is some provision around, something like it's taking place at the moment. However, we have seen examples, again, going over to New Zealand where that high watermark isn't actually available. And so people are essentially underwater on the highs and still seen an increase in the following year, but being taxed on that. So yeah, it can be quite a dangerous sort of piece of legislation depending on how they eventually execute it, if they extrapolate it out to the rest of the marketplace as well too.
And you're saying that people really should be making noise about this, and not just those close to retirement, but also Gen Alpha, Z and millennials. You're saying otherwise they might have to move away from avocado toast.
Yeah, you only have to see, like in New Zealand, if you're holding, say, a Google share goes up in value, the government's asking for 33% of that unrealised gain, even though you haven't sold it. So if that same principle was extrapolated here in Australia, obviously the Magnificent Seven, although they're down, they've still had a pretty good run over the last 10 years, handing out 33% of your unrealised gain each year. That's going to have a massive impact on wealth creation, and obviously all the issues that go with having to sell down to sort of free up funds to pay those tax bills each year too.
It's been a massive sort of week, not only with the market meltdown, but also these cyber attacks, Alex, on superannuation funds. What would your tips for anybody watching be in terms of, just making sure that your digital hygiene, so to speak, is up to date?
Yeah, I think the issue probably is maybe not so much from the technology provider side of things, so the bank or the super fund, although there's certainly been some weaknesses sort of exposed there. What it is the outdated computer system that someone in they're a retiree that's operating that hasn't updated their system and using the same password extrapolated across everything. The dark web certainly is capturing a lot of that data, and that cyber theft is just rampant at the moment. So yeah, you really have to be very, very careful. The old days of a more obvious example, we're seeing very, very highly sophisticated examples in the marketplace.
Do you think it's likely that we are going to continue to see these attacks? And I guess what can the average person do?
Yeah, the retiree is such a soft target for them, and we're seeing it. I had one yesterday where a client reached out and said, "Is this genuine?" And we said, "Absolutely, it's not." And so, yeah, you can see there's some pretty major sort of issues there. The only way you can probably stop is or slow down is obviously from the product provider side of things, because they're the only ones that really are in a position to add that using artificial intelligence and the rest of the sophistication, as the retiree just doesn't have the bandwidth possibly to take on the sophistication that's sort of coming at them.